Welcome to the NTC Talent Builder webinar series. I'm Shauna Dorsey, the Executive Director of the Nebraska Tech Collaborative, and I'm here with our esteemed guest, Dr. Josie Schafer. She's going to talk about a project that we're working on together to support tech workforce data sharing with NTC partners, members, stakeholders, and everyone throughout the state. Yep, Josie, just one second. I'll get that fixed for you. Add to host. There we go. Hey, Grace. So Josie is going to take over and share here, and we'll open it up for Q&A near the end of the conversation. We have an hour together. If it takes that long, great. If you think of questions later, you can always reach out to Dr. Schafer and we'll go from there. So Josie, take it away, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for working with me on this project. We are so excited. That looks good. Let me just fix my screen a little bit. Are you just seeing the slides?
Yep, just see the slides, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm Josie Schafer. I'm the director of the Center for Public Affairs Research at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Talk a little bit about ourselves, just so you have some background into the project. The Center for Public Affairs Research collaboratively produces and disseminates data on a range of topics that impact the lives of Nebraskans. And through this work, we know that there's no topic more important to the lives of Nebraskans than work and our workforce. Across a range of metrics, Nebraskans always stick out for being extremely hardworking. And it's right, work is so central to our lifestyles and our economy that this focus on workforce that my office has taken over the last couple of years has been very important and central to what we do. We do our work in a range of ways, but one thing we'll be talking a lot about today is our long-term relationship with the United States Census Bureau to disseminate census data here in Nebraska. We're actually called the Nebraska State Data Center for the United States Census Bureau. Now, most Census Bureau data is very open access, and not just the decennial census that everyone knows about, like the 2020 census, but other survey products such as the American Community Survey, the Current Population Survey, and a range of other sources, population estimates. The data is all available online. Our office used to be really important in that, they used to have to send us floppy disks to help share that data for Nebraska. But now data.census.gov is a pretty useful tool for accessing that census data. But because of our long-term relationship with them and working with census data all the time, we've become real experts in it. And in fact, for this particular project, we're going to have to use something called microdata, which is actually downloading a sample of the raw data to be able to analyze it in different ways. We are known for this work. We mostly provide it as a public service, but then a lot of folks choose to go a little further with us and do some either original survey research, evaluation research. We're actually conducting focus groups on digital equity around the state. So other original research projects, and then sometimes using census data in different ways, which is what this project has come to be. Sorry, I have the touchiest mouse. I know that, and I'm working on it. We are also doing this work with the Nebraska Tech Collaborative, and we have also developed a workforce data advisory group. So you have the list of the executive committee for the Nebraska Tech Collaborative, as well as who is on our workforce data advisory group. In addition to myself and the CPAR team here at UNO, we are also working with someone in the Department of Economics at UNO, Dustin White, on this project. So a big team guiding us, but it's probably time to talk about what it is they're guiding us towards. So I'm going to talk about the motivation for this project, and I have a couple bullet points on the motivation, but we'll go in detail on each of them. So providing reliable and timely data on the technology workforce of Nebraska in a visual or dashboard platform type thing that's easy to use and access. And that's the first one I want to talk about, but we'll give you the other ones as well. We want to empower stakeholders And we want to promote innovation and growth by exploring the demographics of the technology workforce. But let me talk about why we need reliable and timely data on the tech workforce. This is a slide I show in a lot of my presentations using census data about the workforce of Nebraska as a whole. And I think it's helpful for placing the tech workforce. What is the tech workforce and what do we know about it? It's just a little more detail on this slide. So across the horizontal axis, you have the number of people that work in these occupations. All of these are occupations. And actually, tech is in this computer and math occupation group. So you'll see there's about 30K, 35K working in computer and math in total. Now, what does happen is we have a couple folks in tech that are also in this architecture and engineering in particular. So you'll see numbers kind of ranging, but also why we need this project to sort of hone in on what is tech. And then across our vertical axis, we have the median wage for those jobs. So you will see in both of those industries that are sort of summarizing tech for us at this point, we have very high wages, but we actually have a very low number of folks working in them. And in fact, in Nebraska, we have more people working in low wage industries than high wage industries as a whole. But this helps to see why, a little bit about why this is an extremely important group. And of course, we're the Nebraska Tech Collaborative, so it is an important group to us. But there's a lot of consumption power and innovation power in the sector, so important to grow. And now you can also see it's not a big part of our workforce today. Well, it is actually almost 50,000 people. It doesn't make up a big percentage of that total workforce. And so there is some potential to grow. This is some work by colleagues at UNL's Better Business Bureau, not Better Business Bureau, I said that wrong, BBR, Bureau of Business Research, sorry. And actually Dr. Matarian is on our Workforce Data Advisory Committee to go in between some of those broader sectors I showed on the last slide and list out this tech workforce. So we do have some counts of who is in the tech workforce over time. Like I said, it's just a little under 50,000, 47,894. But even then, it is a small percentage of our workforce. And this is sort of all we really know about it in any detail today. We kind of have, here are the occupations, here is the count. So I'm kind of suggesting we have the footprint, the outline of what is our tech workforce, but we really don't have a lot to go deeper. What is really going on in the tech workforce? Sorry, I didn't know there was so much animation on the slide. I hate when everything doesn't just show up. So that is sort of that first motivation, to get some detail about what is the tech workforce and the importance of that reliable and timely data going back to that larger picture. We want to grow our tech workforce, and so we need to learn about it in order to grow it. The next one I want to talk about is about promoting innovation and growth, again, by exploring the demographics of the technology workforce. Who is actually in that workforce, right? We have a little bit of that landscape, but who are those folks and how did they get into that pipeline to work in the technology industry? And this was this is the founding document for this project. Shauna sent this to me in January and she said, this is what I want to know. And you can see when I say the demographics of the workforce, it was very much what Shauna wanted to know to inform her work with the her leadership at the Nebraska Tech Collaborative. And I think the reason we want to, there's a lot of reasons to know about who is the workforce. I think it helps us in programming and planning. It helps us to understand who's there now so that we can plan for, what the culture of those organizations, help businesses support those that are in the workforce today, but also start to learn about opportunities for growth. In this work, I've really been looking for other examples of the type of dashboard we want to create here in Nebraska. One of the only ones with the sort of demographic detail I've found is from Massachusetts. Massachusetts Technology, Talent, and Economic Reporting System. Here they show the gender mix for some of their tech workforce. You can see females underrepresented, and most of those they have listed. And then they do the race and ethnicity distributions as well. In this dashboard, they have some documentation about why they put this together, and I thought it was really interesting and sort of met some of our goals as well. They say they want to innovate to expand and diversify the talent pipeline. We want to grow our workforce. There's not many ways we can grow except by bringing new people to the workforce. So they say, even as the state remains a top location for companies to find tech workers, and that is true, their percentage of the percentage of the total workforce that is tech is much larger than here in Nebraska. They still face a need to increase the talent pipeline. To do that, they need to include more people from underrepresented groups. And they can even use this dashboard to do things like, say, if we increase female participation rates to 33%, it would have an additional 28,000 people in the technology workforce. And I think that's absolutely a goal we have for this project as well, to help us understand where the pickups are, where are the opportunities to bring new folks in to the workforce. So where are we underrepresenting folks so we can bring some parity to that system. So annoying. The last one, oh, Shauna, what's up?
Hey there, just a question in the chat. And then for those who are here, I did not mention this earlier and I apologize, but I do want to address this one question. But we'll hold until the end to do a live Q&A with Josie. But one question we have that's in here now is related to the technical categories shown earlier. Is there a way to see how your own job is coded? Tech is pretty broad, so curious about which category someone that is a network administrator versus a technology consultant would fall in, for example.
Yeah, so great question. And this goes to a little bit about the sources of the data that we are going to use to do this. So one big sort of term to define is occupation versus industry in particular. So an occupation is the job I have. Industry is what my business does. So for instance, I work in the industry education at a higher education institution, but maybe I would probably not be coded as an educator. I would be coded as a data scientist or something, a researcher, or social science researcher. So industry versus occupation being really important. We want to focus here on occupation. This report by BBR did look at both tech industry and tech occupations, but right, tech workers can work in the education industry. They can work in, they can work in the insurance industry, right? They work across industries. So we were really interested in the tech workforce. But even then you want to go a little bit deeper. So what is my occupation? So the data that we are using actually comes from surveys where individuals are identifying what they do. Now, so when you write down, I'm a network administrator, or you go to what you said, those two, network administrator versus a technology consultant is the example you gave there. You would be categorizing yourself on a survey. Now, most people use slightly different terms for that. And then there are some crosswalks that the US Census Bureau has put out to say, well, if you said this, then you're here. My guess is if you said you were a network administrator, you said something about network, you said something so now a tech manager would actually be in management. So administrator, they felt that was still not management, so they didn't label it there. Versus technology consultant, I would guess you would have had to say something about working across different industries or different fields to get that title consultant. And now I actually don't think we have anything like very much specified that you are a technology consultant. So I would say in that sense, you'd probably be somewhere like computer and information research scientist or something, or something like that. So they're taking keywords that you provide to describe your occupation and then grouping them into categories. And I'm sure that there is some mislabeling you know, and so maybe, you know, Isaac, you might find out one day that you don't like where you're classified, although you can't. So all census data is de-identified. So even when I access what I call microdata, can't go in and see the very specific, Isaac Smith answered this survey at this location on this date, and this is what he said. Microdata is still all de-identified. So I would never be able to figure out where you are specifically. And then, of course, it's a survey product. So they take a sample and then they estimate up to the population. So you may never have taken the survey at all, but based on how many people said they were network administrators, they've gone ahead and identified that total. That was a little detailed, but I hope I answered it. And that's something we can come back, because the advisory committee is having a lot of discussions about what is tech, right? And UNLBBR did some really good work to get this list together, and they also use some other sources to sort of confirm this is what some people call tech, but we may really want to focus in on sort of core tech. So some of the engineers and whatnot, we may end up pulling out for this particular project too. So it's kind of an interesting topic, but all of them, you can go in and see some descriptions and even those sort of coding words that they use to group folks into these classifications. Okay. I went too far. Okay. So actually, yeah, I didn't prepare too much. So please, any questions, I'm happy to answer them and talk more. This last goal is about empowering stakeholders, including policymakers, educators, nonprofits, industry professionals, with insights to make informed decisions and drive positive change in Nebraska's technology workforce. All right, like I said, the overall idea here is growing, supporting, providing information back to those people who can use it. And that is actually the question I have for all of you in just this little bit of time. A pretty broad overview of what we're trying to bring together. Do any of you have use cases, ideas, data points you would want to know more about the tech workforce that could sort of help inform what you're doing or achieve any of those goals I've talked about in brief? So turning it over to the crowd, does anybody even think we need a Nebraska tech workforce dashboard, right? Is this idea of information interesting to any of you all?
We hope you all say yes. Unfortunately, I did not turn on the ability for guests or non-panelists to present or turn on their video or unmute themselves, but you all can submit your thoughts via the Q&A panel, and we will just make them live right away so that it's a little bit more, what do you call that? Real time.
Yeah. So I'm here. So I'll talk a little bit about next steps and maybe a little bit more about the data we are using and putting together. And I know I rolled through pretty fast. That's how I feel this afternoon, I guess. But we can go back in on any of this too and talk a little more about it. Shauna, maybe even you have some questions or comments. We did get a question. Absolutely, it's interesting. I think it's going to be very important knowing where to focus resources regionally and growing talent. That's a really good point, and actually a really interesting point about the data. So let me talk about that. So there are some real data challenges when we want to go to the level of detail that we want to go. So in any so the Census Bureau produces all of these different surveys, but they really just ask a sample, a couple people, and then estimate to the larger population what that number is. And so some surveys are shorter. The American Community Survey is actually a fairly long survey about all sorts of demographics, and it goes into some detail on workforce. But that one's a fairly large sample. so that when we get estimates for those individual occupation groups, and then remember, we want to layer in things like gender, ethnicity, race, veteran status, age, educational attainment. We're really interested in remote work. And are you a remote worker for the tech industry in another state living in Nebraska, or vice versa? And things like that. So every time we sort of go in a little bit more detailed, the sample size gets smaller. And so then we have to be careful that when we estimate, that we are getting right a true estimate of the population. Our margin of error is not too large. So there are some trade-offs in data sources. We have really honed in on what's called the Current Population Survey. It is a large national survey, and it's actually done between the United States Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor. And it has a really specific focus on the workforce. And I might even bring up one of the questionnaires, because it's pretty interesting the level of detail they go in on the workforce. But it is a smaller sample to begin with. Now, they produce, we call them weights, survey weights, so that those small samples, we can still try to estimate the population pretty well. But every time we do that and cut the data a little bit more, we have a challenge. So as we've been talking about this project, one of the things that we've really had to decide about is the level of geography we want to show this data. So when we use American Community Survey data from the United States Census Bureau, we can usually do occupation within some chunkier classifications. So maybe a little bit better than just computer and math, but not too much better, down to the county level. And I feel really good about those estimates. But for the Current Population Survey, they don't even make data available down to the county level, because the survey is smaller. So the trade-off is more data about the labor force versus geographies and regions. And we have been leaning towards making that trade-off and focusing on Nebraska as a whole and the tech workforce in detail versus that geographic detail. So I would, if Ken Edwards, who asked that question about regional, I'd love to hear what you think is regional in the state, because sometimes we can group counties and get a little bit more detail versus down to the county level. Data, particularly on the tech workforce, is fairly available for Omaha and Lincoln, and then Nebraska, or Nebraska as a whole. But as we go into a level of detail on some of those questions, we may lose that. We may lose some of the ability to show that detail at varying geographies. Now, we are also talking about maybe mashing up different data sources here, so that we could show sort of a large grouping of tech workforce, overall, like counts by county or by region, but then the level of detail, demographic detail, would only be for Nebraska as a whole, or things like that. So it's really important for us to hear like what you mean by region and how you might use that data, or what exact data you would want by region, because we can use a couple different sources and sort of put them together. On that topic, I'll also say we are talking to LinkedIn, and they use LinkedIn data to help classify the tech workforce and some of what job descriptions in the tech workforce, and how individuals are doing their tech job trajectory and things like that, and being able to look at some of that data to help sort of reinforce some concepts and ideas that we're seeing in the larger surveys as well. So there is very likely going to be multiple threads of data coming into this project. So I'll just stay on this regional thing for a second, and then we'll jump up to some other questions that have come in. Ken said, I think by development district, regions make the most sense because it bundled with their efforts as well. And I guess like economic development districts, there are a lot. So it's one of the funniest things. So, we do data by rural versus urban. A lot of folks use community college districts for things. So yeah, what we consider a region. I'm working with the community action partnerships right now, and their regions are close to the community college regions, but not exact, things like that. So a lot of regionality, but to be able to give you tech data by regions across the state versus sort of just Nebraska as a whole, that's something we would really have to think about what level of detail we could provide that data. Like I said, we could definitely describe the tech workforce, but to go deeper is a challenge with all data. So then we had a question, data about existing tech jobs in Nebraska is helpful. Is there a way to collect data about entry points and wayfinding? How do people currently find out about what exists in terms of job options? Are there specific approaches that turn people off or work incredibly well? So this is an awesome question. And I think this is why we are building the dashboard, right? We are interested in just that. And we don't, we have anecdotes about how people come in or what some people like. The Nebraska Department of Labor NE Works website, and also on their website, there's lots, so it can be hard to sort of know exactly where to go in. Again, we might have time, I could go there and show that to you. They do some data scraping on job descriptions and things like that, sort of in addition to this LinkedIn data that we might be able to find. But I think the idea is to get a general sense of, well, who is in there now, right? And then we can sort of think about some of these additional points you're making and start to create programs and policies that help that, right? The goal is not to turn people off. The goal is to be attractive. And so we really have to think about that. I'm pulling data on another project right now. And so it's about women in the workforce more broadly, not just in tech. And so women are underrepresented in these high wage jobs, including tech. But by the time they're in, but women are overrepresented in the number getting bachelor's degrees. So it's not that they're not educated and can't be in these high wage jobs. It's that they're choosing a major that doesn't lead them into these high wage jobs as easily. So when we kind of think back, so once we have that data, right, we have to think back, well, what does that mean? So programs at the higher education level for women to get into high wage jobs may be too late. That's one thing I'm thinking about that, right? And we do have a lot of programs to support women in STEM and women going into STEM at the higher education level. But while, yeah, not everyone chooses a major day one, there are general ed requirements to go into some of these more advanced fields that they need to be taking in year one and year two. And so we actually need to be supporting women into high wage jobs well before they hit higher education. We have to help them think about those opportunities, right? So by laying out this data, it doesn't necessarily tell us what's good, what's bad, but then we can start to do some analysis and sort of pinpoint places where our efforts will be more impactful, more effective. And I think that happens a lot, right? We might focus on a certain anecdote, or we think, oh, this program will be great, or another state adopted this program. But when we look at our unique set of data, we can start to focus in on, well, this is what's going on here, and at what point can we actually make a difference? Like I said, I think in this particular area, higher ed may be a little bit too late. We have to start pretty early. Things like that. To Amanda's question, again, it was collect data about entry points, wayfinding, how people currently find out about what exists in terms of job options. That's an interesting point. And specific approaches that turn people off or work incredibly well. So I think our data will be pretty broad compared to some of your questions. The LinkedIn data I know has a lot about entry points and sort of where trajectories through occupations and different locations. So that'll be interesting. The current population survey that we're using does have, people in multiple jobs, when you left a job, when you started a new job. We actually know people in Nebraska don't job switch as much as a lot of other places. So it'll be interesting, but I don't know. So this idea of currently finding out about what exists in terms of job options, I think that's a really, really interesting point. I was actually with the broader Exarban Foundation last week talking a little bit about their internship program. And that I think is a really going to be a very impactful program, because a lot of folks just don't know coming out of school, right? Even if I say I want to go in tech, there's lots of ways to go in tech. So programs that sort of show a variety of what's out there to folks and get them those sort of interactive experiences so they find out what they really want and do. In terms of data, I don't imagine us doing a lot of like job description scraping and things like that. But it is certainly something, even in just helping people to understand what is tech and those different job descriptions in tech. I can run back there, right? Like that list is long. And so I think just in having the website, right, or a place to go to learn about the tech industry in Nebraska, that may be really helpful as well. Okay. Penn City's going to reach back out. I think that's great. Amanda followed up a little bit with us. How will the dashboard blend data and story to better inform decisions on an organizational level, hopefully in a user-friendly way? Yeah, that is definitely the job, right? So I'll tell you, for a really long time, right, as a researcher, our job was to produce reports, right? And, you know, another report on a shelf was becoming not just something I say, but sort of a lifestyle, right? And so from that came this idea, you know, then doing presentations like this, I think, are really helpful just to get sort of the word and information out. But a dashboard can be so useful in that it actually turns learning over to the user, right? The mind that does the work is the mind that learns. It's a saying a lot of professors use, right? So when I am doing the research, I am learning so much. When I create a dashboard, I actually recreate that experience for you, because as you're interacting with it, you're gaining insights, maybe even insights I didn't see or occur to me right away, right? And so you get to actually recreate that learning process. And we find when people learn versus sort of passively read, right, that they're much more likely to be engaged, and as a result of that engagement and understanding, then they're more likely to act on it, right? And so that's how we move forward. I think it's one step in moving forward. Another way, we have this great advisory committee that is going to be giving feedback and helping sort of make sense of this data with us. I think, right, the power of diversity is not just in organizations, it's in research teams as well. So having a lot of different minds say, what does that say to me? How does that look to me? And how can we improve that story and that visual to have the greatest impact? So those are a couple steps we're taking to ensure that's true and to make sure it's user-friendly. And I'll tell you, we are doing it. That is the goal of making it a dashboard versus something else. So I really appreciate the question. And if you notice, our timeline's tight too, but I think we can do a lot. And I also think what's nice about a dashboard, it's something we can layer on, something we can get timely and reliable data to folks now. And then as we hear more from you all about use cases and what you're doing with it and what else you need to know, right? Ooh, now I know that and I was able to do this, but now I really need something else. We can start to do that. We can add to it over time. So I'm pretty excited about that. In regard to blending data, it was actually a major point of discussion at our last meeting, because we are realizing that there are a lot of trade-offs in the data. And, you know, the LinkedIn data is awesome and we're really excited by it, but we don't have full access to it to be able to sort of integrate it. You know, and different data sources have different pros and cons, including the Census Bureau data sources. And so blending that data is not going to be easy necessarily, but I think it does, you know, how do we tell a story that's helpful to everyone? Like I said in the last example, right? If folks need it at a regional level, then we're going to have to, we can't provide monthly or quarterly data, and we might not be able to go into every occupation, but we can give you a good sense of the tech dashboard in some of our smaller regions. Well, we can tell a different story in Omaha, or for some occupations that there's a little bit more density in, we'll be able to go into a little more detail. So, I think it will all come together, but anytime you put a lot of different data sources out there, it can be confusing. Like, was that? Those two things sound the same, but they're not actually the same. And so we'll see that some slightly different numbers, but I think that's my job behind the scenes, to make sure we're reporting things in a way that it's kind of obvious when we're making those choices. Thank you. Those are great questions. Great. Any other questions? I did mention a couple things, so if you don't mind me clicking around, I'm happy to do it. So this is the current population survey. Shauna, let me know if I have to reshare my screen, probably.
Yeah, it looks like you might need to, or nope, you're dragging it over. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, can you see it? Sometimes it shows, sometimes it doesn't.
Not yet.
Well, currently UNO's internet's not great. There we go. So I'm going to go here to the questionnaire. And this isn't even everything that is in this questionnaire. And you'll see longer surveys, fewer people take it. But these are all sort of labor market questions. So we have some about disabilities, we have some about layoffs, even if you were absent for work. So last week your kid was sick and you were at home, they want to know that, right? Because they're trying to get a sense of how many people are absent and why are they absent. How many hours. We had a really robust conversation about people that work multiple jobs in the tech sector and sort of why and how and what does that all add up to. So we have lots of different questions about hours worked. If you worked part-time, why did you work part-time? I mean, the level of detail is incredible. I'm going to keep scrolling and see if I can find professional certificates. We have a lot about the educational attainment of workers. Yeah. There was that question about consulting. So what kind of industry are you in? If you're an employer, how does your, questions about you as an employer, yeah, it goes on and on and on. And so that's what's really exciting, right? We can answer these questions very specifically for tech workers in Nebraska. Like I said, as you go into this level of detail, we have fewer people reporting in any one of these other categories. Lots of questions about income and earnings. So earnings are what you make from work, and we want to know your base, and we want to know any perks. And then income is sort of everything you have. So let's say you have a rental unit or money from dividends or things like that. And so that way we can even sort of tighten up on this idea of what is someone making being a tech worker. And as well as how are folks being paid in the tech workforce. This too also being a national survey, and this might be a great question to the group too. We need to compare to other places, right? So when I said, we had our tech workforce, we don't have a ton of folks working in the tech workforce as a percent of our total workforce. But how does that compare to other states? I told you Massachusetts was higher. So do we want to learn from Massachusetts? How did they grow? Or no, they're not a good comparison state. Actually, something like a Utah that has sort of a Salt Lake City whose tech workforce is booming, but the rest of the state isn't very dedicated to tech or something like that. So having comparison states, metros, places that help us to understand if we're doing good, bad. Sometimes there are trends in the overall labor force, right? In COVID. The labor force went down everywhere. So it's not like, oh, Nebraska's tech sector did something wrong. No, everybody's went down. So we have to compare to other places to get to help do that sense-making work. And so if anybody has any really good ideas about what those, I call them benchmarks, but those places to compare to and why, that's still a big conversation we're having. We have a couple places that are figured out. Yeah, there's still a lot to discuss there, but these national surveys are great because the same questions are being asked of the workforce in other places. So it makes comparison really easy. Well, some other data sources, some more local data sources like the Nebraska Department of Labor or something that is doing job description scraping, they're not comparing to other places, so we don't have that data. Let me take you there because I mentioned that site too. And they're an unbelievable resource, and I don't think a lot of people know about it. So you got to go to labor data. And then I like to go to labor market facts. No, never mind. I like to go to labor market analysis. And for a lot of my research, I'm really interested in job openings because I'm interested in how our workforce is changing. And this goes to Amanda's question too about you know, how do people find out about jobs? So they are doing some compiling of job descriptions that are out there. So number of jobs, openings, median wage, openings with wage, right? Because not all postings put that. Another great part about this site, they do try to show for Nebraska as a whole. This is going to take a minute to load, but you can see job openings by county. Invest in government and we'll have good internet too. And then I'll go down again in a second to show you, they even sort of look for those job skills. So what are people asking for? Now, something I will point out that most of the jobs open right now are actually not in the tech sector. And it's not because we're not hiring in the tech sector or don't have a tech sector at all by any means. But if you go, you remember one of my first slides about our workforce, we have more of that low wage workforce. So you'll see a lot of openings in that because we have a lot of those jobs. And then registered nurses, that's everywhere right now. It's hard to find, but you'll see most of those are in that. But you can come into here. And again, they're the big chunky census groupings. They don't go into that level of detail, but there are 1,000 computer and math jobs open. And then in here, you can do stuff like this and actually find computer programmer jobs that are open. And again, it might not be all of them, but it is all of them that are kind of on Nebraska Department of Labor's radar, which is a pretty big radar. It's gonna happen. Sorry. And then they'll even tell you about some of the qualities they're looking for in computer programmers. And actually, we find that a lot of them really aren't in that tech industry. They're across a lot of industries, which is something kind of interesting about our tech workforce in particular. All right, that's going to take forever to load. So, but go to the AnyWork site. I just don't think people know. We actually found they have a little bit of a dashboard on the tech sector, but they really just, you know, it's more about those job openings and some wage data. I think we're going to go much higher level of detail. I want to get that map to load for you. There you go. So again, you know, and this is just the dynamics of the state. These are our population centers. So it's where our establishments are, our business establishments are. And so then there's a density of job openings in those places. But you'll see there are job openings in pretty much every county. There's no data available for those two. They are very small counties. But you can see that across, and you can do a little bit of analysis and go in and kind of see a little bit. That's just the Zoom feature, but see what types of jobs are available in different counties as well. And there's definitely a pattern, but it doesn't mean that there's not folks working in tech across the state. And we know that, and we do want to be able to provide some insights. Yeah, so I think that's what I said I would show. Any other questions? The data advisory committee is kind of set, but we are going to be looking for feedback throughout this process. The goal is to roll something out by September. Like I said, I think we have some opportunities to layer things on. But we'll be looking for feedback throughout the process. And then once it's out too, right, we'll probably want to show it and get some feedback from you all about what we can do to make it easy to use and actually helpful to you all.
Josie, thank you so much for this. Oh, there's one more question, and I will make it live for you.
Can you easily trace job titles back to tangible education and training providers? So we can tell the level of educational attainment that is most common within those big classifications, and we definitely want to do that. That's something I'm really interested in. So we can look at major and it completed, the level of degree completed. I think actually current population survey, like if you started some college, how many hours do you have in what major or something like that? It has a little bit of detail. I think that's actually going to be an area where we can provide some insights to employers to improve their ability to hire. We find a lot of job descriptions are sort of copy paste, or they put it at the highest level of classification versus what they're willing to train people on. And if you're willing to train, or if you're willing to take folks that just started, you're going to get more people in the pool. We also know, and my good friend Laura on our advisory committee shared this insight with us, women and people of color are less likely to apply for jobs that they're not perfectly qualified for, right? So if it says you need 4 years of experience and a woman has 3, she's unlikely to apply, even though what does 4 years of experience mean, right? Like someone might have been 4 years of part-time, or they had 3 years, but they were in, a position where they were doing everything. So they got really comfortable. And so we know people kind of use those buzzwords and don't always really mean it. And so they're actually limiting their pool of folks in. And so I think by showing sort of, hey, this is who's applying and why, this is the level of educational attainment and fields that feel they can come to you. If you open that up, or if you're more willing to open that up, here's who could, right? Here's the pipeline of people that are in this other grouping that would. A lot of folks require bachelor's degrees, but right, some of the great tech success stories don't have bachelor's degrees. So maybe that's not what you mean. You actually mean some experience in a computer programming class. Great, say that. So I think we might help people understand where the pipeline of folks are, and it might not be what they're putting in their job descriptions. So that might be, I'm excited to get that data out there for sure. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. This was so great. Thank you for the overview and for your interaction with we tried here, y'all. Thank you for being flexible. We'll work on this for next time, but for interacting with our guests. This video will be available later for you to review, and we'll share contact info for Dr. Schafer. We also have a form for you all to share additional questions or thoughts about what this could be, knowing that we can't do everything, but we are really interested in your feedback.
We want to hear everything. Yeah,
we do. We want to hear it all. So thanks again, everybody, and take care.